Hey everybody, Jeremy here, and welcome to a new episode of Sipping with Jeremy. And today we're going to be talking about Michter's Distillery. Michter's is one of my favorite go-to whiskeys. I love all four of their expressions, and anytime I'm at a new bar and I see them on the back bar, I know I'm going to be safe there. So Michter's history is really cool because it dates back all the way to before America was a country, and it's gone through a couple name changes since then. So in 1753, in the town of Schaeffertown, Pennsylvania, John Shanks started Shanks Distillery. There's Pennsylvania lore that Shanks Distillery was such a popular brand that General George Washington bought barrels there before his troops had to bunker down in Valley Forge. Then in the mid-1800s, a man named Abraham Baumberger bought the distillery and changed the name to Baumberger Distillery. And nowadays, Michter's releases 2 whiskeys a year under the name Shanks and Baumberger to give honor to these 2 previous owners. Like many distilleries during Prohibition, they closed down. After the repeal of Prohibition, the ownership of the distillery kind of went back and forth like a hot potato. In the 1950s, owner of the distillery, Lou Foreman, changed the name to Michter's, combining the names of his 2 sons, Michael and Peter. Jump forward to 1989, and the distillery closed down. And that was just due to the fact that American whiskey / bourbon was not popular in the United States. And I know that's silly hearing that now, talking about in 2024 how whiskey wasn't popular. But yeah, in the 70s and 80s, whiskey wasn't that popular anymore. And so the distillery went away. But it wasn't gone for too long. 2 friends by the name of Joseph Magliocco and Richard Newman bought the trademark to the name Michter's and opened up a distillery in Kentucky. And if you're ever in Louisville, Kentucky, definitely check out their Fort Nelson distillery. It's a really cool experience. There's a lot of interactive things there to do, and yeah, it's just a really fun time. Now, there are 4 core expressions from Michter's, and that's what we're going to try today. It is going to be their sour mash, their bourbon, their American whiskey, and their rye. Let's go ahead and get started with the sour mash. So the sour mash whiskey, you don't see a whole lot of it nowadays, but apparently it used to be Shanks' biggest seller. Now, sour mash whiskey technically isn't bourbon or technically isn't rye. It is its own category of whiskey. And that's because of the process that starts the whole thing. So as a distiller, what you would do is you take a bit of the mash from a previously fermented batch, throw that into the new batch that's about to be fermented, and have that kind of be your starter. And this just makes the process of kind of using old, so it's in a way a Solera system of fermenting instead of aging. But yeah, it makes it its own category of whiskey. Now let's go ahead and give it a try. So there's a good amount of flavor in this. Overall, I'd say this is more of a sweet style whiskey. You get a lot of toffee, a little bit of marzipan. There's some soft apple fruit. I get a little bit of I would say, brown sugar kind of characteristic too. There is a hint of spice. There's like a little baking spice on there, a little bit of rye spice. But really just kind of tickles the palate just to break down some of those sweeter flavors. This is more of a richer style whiskey, and it's just a really nice one to sip on. I can definitely see you using it in cocktails, but I could see you also adding a cube of ice to this and there being some really cool evolution in the glass for this one. Now let's go ahead and move on to the bourbon. Really, with any of these whiskeys, I'd love to give you a mash bill and let you know exactly how, the percentages of what's in here and exactly how long it's aged. But Michter's likes to keep those things a little hush-hush. So this is their bourbon, so that means we know it's at least 51% corn. The rest is rye, wheat, malted barley, and we know it's aged for a good amount of time. By the coloring, you can see that there's a nice bit of aging on this. But yeah, I couldn't say exactly for how long. But let's go ahead and try it and see what it's like. So if someone was to ask me, Jeremy, I need a bottle that just shows me a good example of what bourbon is, this is what I would hand them. There's some really nice chocolate characteristics here. You get some vibrant tea spice notes, a little bit like Earl Grey tea that really pairs well with the oak spice that's here as well. And then there's also this really nice candied orange, kind of orange zestiness too. So that's just a really nice round flavor. There's a lot of chocolate and orange. That spice really balances it out nicely, that more kind of tea spice with a little bit of oak spice. But yeah, to me, this is like a quintessential bourbon. If you're just kind of trying to look for like what a standard definition of bourbon is, this is what I would give you. Because it hits almost all those palates that I like for a bourbon. You get a little bit of that richness from the chocolate, you get some spice from the tea and the oak, and there's a little bit of fruit. There's a lot of stone fruit in bourbons nowadays. This is a little bit more citrusy fruit, but there's that fruit pop too. And yeah, it's just a well-rounded kind of all-around bourbon here. Now let's go ahead and move on to the Michter's American Whiskey, what I like to call their double bourbon. So this is Michter's American Whiskey. I did just refer to it as their double bourbon, and that's because this whiskey is the exact same mash bill as the Michter's bourbon. But instead of aging this in new oak like you're supposed to by American law, they put it in barrels that have already held Michter's whiskey. So thus, it is no longer a bourbon, it is just an American whiskey. I have a friend who works for the distributor of Michter's, and I made a joke to him one time, and I was like, why don't they just call it the double bourbon? He's like, because double bourbon's not a thing, Jeremy. And I was like, I know that, Jake. You guys should just make it because it'd be funny. I don't think he found it as funny as I did, but I still refer to this as a double bourbon because it is their bourbon that they age in bourbon barrels. So it's bourbon on top of bourbon, so it's a double bourbon. It makes sense, dang it. Let's go ahead and try this. So since this is a whiskey that is made with a bourbon mash bill that is just aged in bourbon barrels instead of new oak, there's definitely a softness and a roundness to this that you don't get in the Michter's bourbon. Some of the characteristics are similar. The tea spice note is here. It comes off a little bit more bergamonty, so a little bit more citrus with that tea spice. You don't get as much of the oak spice naturally because there's not as much new oak here. So there's just a lot more of the fruit notes. So I get a little bit more peach here than you did on the bourbon. And then there is a really nice floral rye spice too. So definitely like a peach tea with some bergamot heavy aspects to that. And then some really nice soft floral rye spice is what you get in this American whiskey from Michter's. Now let's go ahead and move on to the rye whiskey. This is Michter's rye whiskey. And what makes this one stand out a little bit more from the other three in their core is that this one actually says single barrel on the label. So the other three have small batch in their title, and this one says single barrel. So instead of blending barrels together, they're taking single barrels of this rye and bottling it individually. Now let's go ahead and try it. So it shouldn't be too surprising that this is the most vibrant of the core expressions here. I mean, it is rye, but you just get a lot of really expressive spice characteristics here. So you do get some rye, there is a little bit of anise, some soft fennel, a little bit of tea spice, kind of Earl Grey again on there. And there is also an apple fruit finish here. A little bit more of a red apple kind of richness, but then there's a little bit of green apple acidity too. So it's just a very expressive, vibrant rye whiskey here. Alright everybody, that's going to wrap up this episode of Sipping with Jeremy. Thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned a little bit of something about Michter's. And if you're intrigued, go ahead and click on some of the links below where you can purchase it. Thanks for watching, y'all. Have a great day. See you soon, and drink well.